This is Paw Print, an animal rescue community, episode 135. I'm Harold Ree, and today's guest is Tom English.
Just to see people coming in and having been completely flooded out, and they're with their animals, and they have to say goodbye to their animal, and they're crying. They're saying, "Mommy will be back, Daddy will be back, don't worry," and having to leave their animal. It's very touching.
We're so pleased to have Tom English with us, previous guest, as he updates us on Hurricane Harvey in this special episode. If you want to learn more about this episode, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/135. First of all, really just wanted to ask, how are you? Are you safe? Are you sound?
I was very fortunate to go through the storm with very minimal damage. People just a few miles from me are a different story, so I'm really lucky.
Can you tell us approximately where do you live in relation to Houston and Galveston? And
I live in Texas City, Texas, which is between Houston and Galveston, in Galveston County, so almost to the island. I'm just a few miles from Galveston Island.
I remember watching on Facebook, you made some videos. I mean, I would say the very kind of first day of the storms, it just felt at that point more like a heavy rain.
The winds were high, but they were not anything that were truly exceptional from a bad storm. But the rain was just relentless. We're used to hard rains here. I've lived all over the country, and I've never experienced a place where the rain just comes so intensely as it does here. A matter of inches of rain falling in an hour is not unusual, but this time it just kept raining, and it rained and rained and rained. I think we got in total over 50 inches of rain, which basically meant we got about a year's worth of rain in, I think, a 2-day period.
Well, some folks are saying it's the equivalent of what they call a 1,000-year flood, even though I don't think they've ever recorded weather for longer than nearly as long as 1,000 years. So it's all theoretical at this point.
Certainly not in this part of the world. They haven't.
Sure. When did it start going from a serious downpour to, wait a second, there might be something a lot more dangerous going on? Pretty
much after the first night, the flooding began. And we ended up, I think we were able to go out. The storm started Friday. We were able to get out Saturday and drive around and go to a store. But by Sunday, the roads were flooded. And that's when we started seeing on the computer, watching the videos come in from Dickinson, Texas, which is about 5 miles away, and the extreme flooding that they had there, and just the feeling of helplessness that we were so close, but we really couldn't do anything to help those people.
Mm.
You know, the waters, these are fast waters, rushing waters. I don't know. I know people went out, private citizens went out in their boats to help, but that took a lot of guts to do that, I'll tell you.
Why do you say that? What were the dangers?
The electricity was still on.
Mm.
So there were live wires in the water. There have been some electrocutions due to that. Just the flow of the water washed people away. And just also the contaminants in the water. You know, this is the largest petrochemical industry in the nation is in this area. So there's a lot of contaminants in the ground already. And, anything that got out was in that water. So it's just not a good situation to be in that water for any reason. And things like snakes as well. I know people that were bit by snakes. So just a bad situation to be in.
Yeah, sounds horrible. When you think about the parts that got hardest hit, does it feel random? Is there like a logic to why certain parts got flooded so
certainly,
badly?
Yeah, the areas that got flooded that I've seen are either right next to a bayou, which is basically a slow river. Houston is the bayou city. It's full of these slow meandering rivers that are just the natural waterways that when flooding occurs, they become raging rivers and overflow their banks. Plus the particularly low-lying areas, of course, were naturally going to be flooded by 50 inches of rain.
When you think about the actual personal stories, or whether it's people or animals, was there anything that really either touched you or in some ways kind of concerned you?
Well, I think I share this with everybody, that the stories that tend to get to us the most are the ones where we're actually a little bit distant from them and we can't do anything to help. So when we see things like the nursing home in Dickinson was flooding and the elderly ladies were sitting in the water, it's 5 miles from my house and I can't do anything to help. And that hurts a lot when you realize that's going on and you can't do anything. When you're actually meeting a dog or meeting somebody that is getting rescued or has been rescued, it's a lot different, because you're there, you can talk to them, or if it's a dog, you can help the dog, and you don't feel so bad about it, because you can get involved and you can make a difference, I think. So it's kind of odd, I think, that what hurts us the most here is also what hurts somebody the most 1,000 miles away who's watching.
How about the animals? I mean, some really just haunting photos, everything from livestock to, typical dogs and cats. Anything that really kind of stood out to you?
Well, yeah, I was volunteering at the shelter in Dickinson, Bayou Animal Services Shelter, which was a staging area for a lot of displaced dogs and cats to come in. People that were fleeing dropped their animals off there if they had to, or people that were rescued. Oftentimes, Fish and Game or police or firemen or Humane Society of the United States would rescue people and their animals, and the animals would come to the shelter and the people would go on to another facility, perhaps, just wanting to keep all of the dogs and cats at the shelter, where they had a large number of volunteers and supplies and medications and know how to help them. We felt it was safer, I think, to keep them there. And it did work out well. But, just to see people coming in and having been completely flooded out, and they're with their animals and they have to say goodbye to their animal and they're crying. They're saying, "Mommy will be back, Daddy will be back, don't worry," and having to leave their animal. It's very touching. And one of the last dogs of the day when I was there a couple days ago was a Basset Hound mix, and the animal control officer had just brought him in as I was doing a little bit of video clip, and she told me the story as I was filming him getting put into his kennel. His 83-year-old mother, her house was flooding, and she didn't know what to do, so she put him on top of the china cabinet, and she swam out the door. And she made it, and she let the rescue people know that her dog was in there, so this animal control officer went in and got the dog off the china cabinet, brought him in. So it's just, I can't imagine doing that as a healthy, strong, almost in my prime male, to imagine an 83-year-old woman having to go through that. I don't know how she had the strength to do it.
Right. Wow. When you're in Dickinson, was it just sort of an all hands on deck situation? I mean, what was it like? How early did you start? How late could you end?
Well, I was able to get in Tuesday of last week. So 1 week ago today was the first day that the roads to Dickinson were at all passable. And I have a 4x4 SUV, so I was able to get through a bit of water that a car would not have made it and make it my way to the shelter. And what I found there was, there were a number of volunteers there already. But these are people that had walked to the shelter to help. And that means they were walking from their completely flooded homes.
Hmm.
I met a number of people that had lost their car and their home, and they didn't have anything left. So they came to the shelter to help. And I worked with some of those people. And it made me realize that sometimes people just have to do that. They have to change their priority. They have to say, okay, it used to be that my home and my car were important to me. But now that that's lost, I need to find something else that's important to me, or else I won't be healthy. And so I think they did it to help themselves too, to keep themselves going. They knew they had to get out and help others. They did.
Right. I would imagine as a colleague, it would be probably pretty tough to not acknowledge, what they're going through. I mean, was it too soon to even talk about those kinds of things with your colleagues?
I would. Everybody asks everybody, how are you? What have you, have you taken on water? It's just the standard question. And when you hear somebody has lost everything, it's very easy to be sincere because it's so fresh. That fear we have is so fresh in us that it's very easy to be 100% sincere and say, "Oh, I'm truly sorry." And you just get on with what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like with over the holiday weekend, a lot of these volunteers, just as you said, whether working with humans or animals, a lot of them were delaying their own situation because they were committing so much time to volunteering. And you hate to say it, the beginning of the month, you got to pay your mortgage, you got to pay your bills. A lot of these volunteers had to in some ways kind of return to their own normal life.
Well, I think it's this week things are just getting to the point where we can get back to a little sense of normalcy, and that jobs are there to return to finally. For example, I just went back to work today. And I think for a lot of people, there was no job for them to go back to for the first week. They had to wait at home or wherever they were volunteering. There was nothing else to do. So it's definitely a sense of normalcy when you can get back to something that you were doing before, like work.
Sure. What thoughts do you have about folks who lost their car, lost their home? Some of them are still living in a shelter. I mean, what are some of the things that we as outsiders can do to help?
Well, I don't really know for the humans, because what they need is so much. I mean, they need their cars back. They need their homes back. I think that maybe just encouraging a federal response that's appropriate would be the best thing that people can do across the country. It's such a big problem that it has to be handled by the federal government, I think.
And at this point, I mean, sounds like obviously not just weeks and months. I mean, we're talking years, for better, for worse.
For some areas, yes. Many of the areas were not very hard hit. Minor flooding. The water came in, it went out. You cut away some drywall and replace the carpets or the flooring, and you get back to life. But other places where the water was 8 feet deep and the house was underwater for days, that's a different story. So it's very localized, I think. There'll be little communities that have been wiped out.
Mm.
It's very odd to live in a place where 95% of my area is pretty much back to normal. I can go to the grocery store, I can go to the gas station, things like that, and it's pretty much like normal life was. And then to realize that there's these areas that are just completely completely destroyed.
Yeah. Well, we're talking to Tom English, previous guest, and definitely a big time animal rescue advocate and hero. When we hear, at least from the outside, we've been hearing about a lot of other animal rescue organizations stepping up, sometimes arranging private planes to fly to Houston,
Right.
pick up whether it's 10 dogs and cats or 100. How does that actually help?
I think it's a huge help in that it frees up the shelters to focus on the displaced animals. The dogs and cats that are being flown out, these are not displaced dogs and cats normally. The displaced animals are being held for the owners. When they get, their life back, they can come looking for their animal and get their family member back. So it's not the case that a dog is being plucked out of the water and flown to Washington State. The animals that are leaving, for as far as I have seen in anything I've been involved with, are animals that were previously in the shelters. So most often they've already been spayed or neutered, or at the very least they're current on vaccines and have been gotten healthy. And what that does is it frees up the shelters to really focus their effort on the displaced animals that are coming in. It gives them the room, and it also gives them the time that they need.
Okay.
So it is a huge help, and it's very interesting. I've been thinking about the evolution of this process. I know that in 2005, Hurricane Katrina kind of started off the idea of a nationwide response to helping animals, and some groups did come down in 2005 and take dogs, and in fact, that's kind of how a lot of the national rescue of southern dogs actually got started. Groups, for example, like Labs for Rescue out of Connecticut, I know they came down to New Orleans area and rescued Labrador retrievers in 2005. And that opened a lot of eyes for some of these people in the North as to what the conditions were in the South in terms of animal overpopulation and euthanasia, and started this idea of transporting dogs across the country to good homes. So by 2008, when Hurricane Ike hit us here, we already had this connection with Northern Rescues. And so in 2008, there was a response, a bigger response to coming down and getting dogs, freeing up rescues and shelters so that they could utilize all of their resources to helping the newly displaced animals. But what's happened now with Hurricane Harvey is on an entirely different level.
Mm.
What I'm seeing is a very large number of rescues, both the national rescues like the Humane Society of the United States, plus many, many, many of the smaller rescues across the country that have made some connection with a southern rescue. They're all stepping up and making efforts to either fly dogs out, or they're driving down and doing transports, or they're hiring transport services. So there's a very large number of animals that are being transported out. And it really is helping.
How do you think, I mean, you've already mentioned it to a certain degree, but from Katrina, over 10 years ago, I believe over 1,000 people died, thousands of animals displaced or perished. To what degree do you think the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina has helped Houston, a much bigger city, suffer at least a little bit less in terms of deaths and displacements?
What I really think helped with the issue of deaths was our near miss from Hurricane Rita. And Hurricane Rita threatened the Houston area. The largest evacuation in the United States occurred, and a couple of million people hit the roadways. And what they found out was it took them more than 24 hours to get through the city. And more than 100 people died trying to, because the temperatures were over 100 degrees and people were running out of gas on the roadways. And so people learned a valuable lesson there, that it's very, very difficult to evacuate a very large city. And the population of Houston has probably grown by 20% since then. If people had tried to do the evacuation this time and gotten stuck on the roadways, there would be 1,000 deaths. Because, as you saw, I'm sure, many of those roadways were 10 feet, 15 feet underwater.
Right.
There would have been a lot of people that drowned.
Oh, boy.
If they had been in the roadways. So I think the idea of shelter in place was a wise one. And that's what the mayor of Houston called for. And I think that's what saved so many lives, was people staying in their homes. We were not going to get the high winds. We were going to get the rain. We were going to get the flooding. But the buildings were going to be intact. So as long as you stayed in your building and go to the second floor or go up on the roof if you have to, you would have a structure. And so I think that was the big difference. And I think, of course, Katrina, they had the high winds and the flooding. So they got the double whammy. We really just got the flooding here.
Well, we're speaking to Tom English. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, I think all of us would really like to share a sincere appreciation to the rest of the country for your effort for helping, particularly the animal welfare people. We're just overwhelmed by the response. And it's very heartening to us to know that we have rescue partners across the country that care about saving lives as we do.
Tom, we're glad you're safe. We're glad that your own animals are safe as well. And please keep us up to date. Just as you said, sometimes it feels a little helpless being hundreds or thousands of miles away, just as it can feel a little helpless being 5 miles away, right?
Right, exactly. Well, thank you very much, Harold. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again.
We just want to say thank you to Tom English for sharing his updates from Hurricane Harvey in Southeast Texas. If you want to learn more, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/135. We'll also share some links on ways you may want to donate to organizations helping out with Hurricane Harvey. If you want to stay up to date, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/thisispawprint. We're continually posting as many animal rescue related stories regarding Harvey, so we hope you join us in the conversation. Well, that's it from us, folks. Thanks for listening to this special episode of Pawprint. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time on Pawprint.
Pawprint is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.